Good morning interweb, this is follow up to my previous video, Coastal Landforms for Fantasy Mapping. If you haven't already seen that video, go check it out, otherwise none of this is going to make any sense whatsoever. Nice, the Barrier Islands. Being from North Carolina, I was hoping you'd talk about Barrier Islands. Perfect for pirates to use as safe havens. This is exactly how I wanted people to think about the video. I see my role here as being kind of like science investigator, go investigate the science and give it to you guys, and then you take that science and create stories from it. So you see Barrier Islands and you think pirates, class. While I was writing the video, the marine potholes really stuck out to me, those weird alien shaped, perfectly cylindrical hollows on shore platforms. I could see creation myths coming out of those real easy. You know, the gods molded the world out of clay, and those marine potholes are the gods' fingerprints. And you could even use the tides over those marine potholes as further like religious allegory. So even though the tides obscure the marine potholes, the god is always present and will reveal itself when the time is right. So yeah, in summation, my role here is to talk about the science. Your role is to take that science and create cool stories from it. So thank you. Dozens and dozens of local maps. Here I come. So aside from thinking of physical landforms as story triggers, I was really hoping people would think in terms of scale, and it looks like people were, and that's class. Lots of the landforms discussed in the previous video won't show up on the world map. They're too small scale, but they will show up on local maps. So as with so many things to do with mapping, really think about scale. Tidal wetlands such as salt marshes can grow to such an extent that they fill an entire estuary, connecting former barrier islands to the mainland. A good example of this would be at the mouth of the Merrimack River in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Plum Island, to the south, is attached to the mainland by a tidal flat at low tide, but is only separated from the mainland by Plum Bush Creek at high tide, only 30 meters wide. To the north, the barrier island is actually fully attached to the mainland by extensive salt marshes, and as such, doesn't have a separate name. For sure, as mentioned in the video, there's like so much complexity in coastal landforms that I couldn't really cover it all in one video. So I would encourage everyone again that if they heard anything in the main video that really piqued their interest, like say barrier islands or salt marshes, go look into it further and check out the prototypical examples from around the world, and you'll just get tons of cool locations and cool ideas out of that. The main video is definitely not exhaustive and can't really be short of being like a documentary. Emergent coasts are dominated by erosion, submergent coasts are dominated by deposition, so how your rivers will interact with your coasts will be determined by that. Important, large river deltas cannot form on emergent coasts because they are depositional landforms. You can have some small scale splitting, but you won't be able to get those characteristic protrusions. Compare the Colorado River to the Nile. Yep, nothing to add here other than that is a wonderful addition to the video and it has my endorsement. Pay attention to that, folks. I was surprised to learn rocky coasts dominate. I've really only been to coastal plains, but thinking on it more, that might reflect which kind people visit more. Yeah, like beach holidays are a thing, cliff holidays, not so much. I was actually surprised as well just how much rocky coasts dominate, and I haven't been able to answer this, but I wonder, is that unique to Earth or would that hold for any Earth-like planet in general? I suspect it's unique to Earth, but that's a guess and I can't confirm it. Because the way I'm thinking here is that if you were to take the sea level and say like raise it all the way up so only the last 100 meters of the Himalayan peaks, for example, were to stick out of the sea, you'd be looking at a world then that has 100% rocky coasts. Similarly, if you were to take sea level and drop it completely so there's only like a little puddle in the middle of what was the Atlantic, you'd be looking at a world that has like 100% coastal plains. So I suspect it could differ world to world, but unfortunately we have like only one data set here, so not a whole lot I can say about that. Other than you can play with it a bit if you so choose. Any reason you couldn't have a fantasy world with a cold tolerant mangrove equivalent? Yes and no. So heads up, botany, not my strong suit. I actually know embarrassingly little about botany. So I actually hit up Bibluridian just before recording this video and we talked over cold temperature mangroves. We came to the conclusion that it's a kind of cool, fun idea that you could make work, but there's significant barriers to it. I suspected the roots of a mangrove tree would be a problem in cold temperatures. Like, you know, when you go outside and it's cold, your fingers and toes get really cold first. The roots of a mangrove tree are kind of like fingers and toes in that way, that they'll just feel the effects of cold way more than the rest of the tree. So I suspect evolution would drive those roots away. And I suspect evolution would drive away a lot of the properties that make a mangrove tree look like a mangrove tree. It would kind of force it to become more shrub-like. And that's effectively what we get at salt marshes. But the problem Biberidian rays, which is an interesting one and I didn't even think of, was competition. In the tropics, the ecological competition is just huge, so it drives species to go into like less optimal places, like a tree living in salt water. Sounds daft, right? But if there's a bunch of competition going on, that might be the niche you need to exploit to survive. The more towards the poles you go, the less competition there is, so the less chance you're going to see trees existing in intertidal zones in salty or brackish water. You'd have to invent some sort of competitive reason for them to be there. So yeah, anyway, sorry, in summation, cold temperature mangroves could exist. You'd need to do some explaining there, and they'd need to change their morphology quite a bit, but it may well be workable. Also, there are apparently some kinds of coral that like deep water. Yep, deep water corals. I believe we have deep water corals off the coast of Ireland. They don't inform coastal landforms, so I didn't talk about them at all. Also, what kind of things would someone look for if they wanted to make the equivalent of the Giants Causeway? So for those who don't know, the Giants Causeway is a landform up in Northern Ireland, and it's characterised by these hexagonal columns of basalt, I think it is. Either way, the landform looks dope. If you want this to occur on your worlds, you're looking for volcanism. Essentially, anytime there's a weird landform, volcanoes did it, tectonic activity, and volcanoes did it. If I recall correctly, the formation of Giants Causeway is due to volcanoes spewing out really thick basalt, and then that basalt cooled and cracked into those hexagonal patterns. Kind of like how, sheets of mud crack in the sun. Same kind of thing, except with columns of rock. So if you're looking for ancient volcanism on your worlds. Also, don't go too mad with the real extreme exotic coasts. Sprinkle them sparingly. Much like the weird coloured beaches, you don't want them to occur all the time. Less is more. What about a place like Ha Long Bay in Vietnam? How are those island cliff things formed? So yeah, Ha Long Bay, which I've totally mispronounced, but we're just going to live with that, is a really famous area of the world with these like stunning landscapes. You're all aware of it. It looks like this. If I recall correctly, these are basically flooded karst landscapes. So like a bunch of fairly soluble rock gets lifted up out of the sea. The ice age comes and goes. Sea levels rise. They flood the area. Then erosion works to like carve out these really cool island cliff things. National Geographic, I think, put it really well. It's a karst field, but at sea. Anyways, that was that. Follow up done. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoyed the main video. Massive thanks to you for watching, and a massive thanks goes out to the patrons for helping to make Artifact Scene a possibility. In particular, Lichen, Johan Spaedtke, Oliver Reed, Spencer Brownlee, Alexander Roper, John Hooyer, Ripta Pasay, and World Anvil. Until next time, Edgar out.